Here we're going to take a look at the drum parts for the track The Best of You, which was taken off the band's 5th album, In Your Honor. We're going to kick off with the 2-bar pattern that you hear when the drums enter, and it's played between mainly between the floor tom and snare. The pattern sounds like this. I'll play it slowly at first, and then I'm going to isolate the bass drum and the snare drum part so you can hear how they play constant 8th notes between them. Throughout that feel, you hear a crash every 2 bars. And then almost every 4 bars, you'll hear this variation at the end with a 16th note fill between the snare and the crash cymbal. So I'll play that slowly for you. As the track starts to build, the first change that we have on the drums is moving over to playing quarter notes on the snare drum. Still riding 8th notes on the floor tom, and so that variation sounds like this. And next, to build up the intensity, we start crashing on beat 3 as well as beat 1. And so basically, the right hand is going to be moving between the crash and the floor tom on all the 8th notes. As we come out of that section, there's a 16th note single stroke fill on the snare drum, and we've got the bass drum underpinning that with 8th notes as well, which is something you'll hear throughout the 16th note fills on the track. And so I'm going to move from that verse variation we were playing before into that fill, which takes us into the next section. Moving into the bridge section now, we've got a 2-bar pattern, and now we're onto the ride cymbal, and we've got some 16th note fills. Notice the bass drum playing 8th notes underneath the fill at the end of the 2nd bar. Hear it slowly. In the second half of the bridge, the syncopated feel that we had in the first section is extended out to the end of the bar. So it's a much more syncopated feel. We're up onto the crash cymbal for this. So here it is slowly. Two bars after that, we've got a simple fill on the snare drum where we're accenting the second 16th note of beat 4. And so this is best done with your left hand going up to the crash cymbal. So here's that bar in isolation played slowly. And here's the whole of that section. Next up, we've got a chorus with a half-time feel, and we're still riding on the crash cymbal, but we've moved our backbeat to beat 3 to create our half-time feel, and that sounds like this. You could also move that around the crashes to get a bigger sound, perhaps playing the downbeat here and the backbeat on this one, something like this. You'll need the snares turned off for this next 8-bar section, where the drums enter playing 8th notes on the floor tom. And then we've got 4 different fills, which we'll take a look at individually. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. On that fill, you've got a choice of how you play that 16th note triplet figure. You could play it with a right, left sticking. Or you could play it single strokes, moving from right to left. Here it is up to speed. The next variation plays 16th note triplets, so six notes per beat on each of the 4 drums. And so here's that played slowly. And this is just a single strokes. And then the final fill is just 16th notes down the kit, ending with a flam on the last floor tom. So here's the whole of that section, played slowly and then up to speed. As we finish that section, you've quickly got to turn the snares back on, and we're out into the next chorus. And now we've gone to a double time feel. So our backbeats are now on all of the quarter notes. We're riding up on the crash cymbal, and the bass drum, it may sound like it's just playing the upbeat 8th notes, but it's also playing beat 1 as well. So the bass drum pattern sounds like this. After 14 bars of that double time feel, we've got the 2-bar build up into the outro with the drum fills around the accents played by the rest of the band. The crescendo is played between the crash cymbal, the kick and snare, and it's just as 8th notes over 2 bars. And I'm going to play that into the first 2 bars of fills, and then we'll break down each one of those 8-bar fills individually. The first 2 beats of these 8 fills are all identical. We're basically playing a crash on the downbeat, then the last 16th note of beat 1. We're playing beat 2 and then a crash on beat 2. So all the figures sound like this. The only variations are on those last couple of beats. And so here's the first variation. The fill is just this. We've got the E and so the last 3 16th notes of beat 3 on the snare drum, and then the 4 16th notes of beat 4 between these two toms. So without the front figure, it sounds like this. 1, 2. It's important, if you're going to miss that first 16th note off beat 3, that you start that snare drum fill with your left hand. If you start it with the right, it's going to be the wrong way around. So it's basically like missing your first right hand note off. So here's that first example along with the crashes before it. The next example is 16th note triplets. And again, this is just on beats 3 and 4. So we're playing single strokes on the snare. We play 4 notes on the snare. The next 2 of our first 6 16th note triplets on the floor tom. The first of our next 6 on the floor tom, then the remaining notes on the snare. It makes sense when I play it. Here we go. So again, I'm just going to play beats 3 and 4. 1, 2. 1, 2. And here it is with the figure before it. Our third example is just 16th notes between the snare and the toms, and that sounds like this. And with the figure before it. The fourth example is a classic hand-foot triplet. So we're playing this right-left foot. And this is played between the snare and rack. Then the right hand moves across to the floor tom and plays 2 notes on the floor tom before coming back to the snare. So again, just beats 3 and 4. And slowly. And with the figure. Our fifth bar is just 16th notes on the snare as single strokes. The sixth example is a syncopated figure, played between the snare and the rack tom. Again there, because you're missing the first 16th note of beat 4, it's easier to play those 2 notes on the rack tom as left-right and hitting the final note with the left hand on the snare. And then the last fill before the 8th bar is 8th note triplets. So I'll play this along with the figure so you can hear the switch in subdivision. And in the final 8th bar, we just choke the final crash of the figure. So let's hear those 8 bars played slowly, first of all. And now at tempo. And that concludes our look at all of the parts for the best of you.